travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. Lots going on today, of course. One of the stories that really did strike me was the arrest. It was unexpected for me in a way, in that I had no idea this was going to happen, that we were going to see Brian Molefe, Siyabonga, Gama and Iraj Singh arrested for their role in Transnet. And we'll talk about it in just a moment. But I was just reminded of one of the little footnotes. You know, sometimes the little details of a story are kind of damning one way or another. They prove that a case is strong or a case is weak. And sometimes it doesn't even have a direct bearing on the sort of criminality or alleged criminality. It just tells you what was going on at the time. And one of the stories, I went to go and look it up, that I remember from the Zondo Commission was Iraj Singh was the chief financial officer at Transnet. I mean, a very big job. I would imagine it to be in probably the top 10 difficult jobs in South Africa outside of actually, running the show, if you see what I mean. I would think that you would spend long hours, intense conversations, lots of spreadsheets, all of that stuff. And during that time, he did not access his salary once. There was evidence led at the Zondo Commission. They went to his, I don't know how, but they went and looked at his account and said, you haven't drawn any of your salaries out ever. I mean, I found that just amazing. And I just remember that. And he said, no, he had savings from other bank accounts. And the obvious question, was how were you funding your lifestyle then? I also would never understand why, if you were working so hard at something, you wouldn't go and access the money from it. I mean, I certainly would. That's the way that I would see it. The other big story, and there's quite a lot of politics on the Money Show this evening, but that's just the way we are, I think, is that the coalition sort of surviving the weekend again. Strong language from the DA, but I think we're at a point where language might not cut it. Still scratching my head over the real reason why President Ramaphosa removed Andrew Whitfield when he did, what the real story was. There's something very interesting going on there, and I don't think we have the full story just yet. I'm sure it will come out. Might well be to do with ANC internal dynamics. I will ask a little later. We'll speak to Samuel Kukeli. It was easy to sort of forget this over the weekend, but it seemed to me that there was a moment, maybe about half an hour, when the president and the ANC blinked because the president cancelled his trip to Spain. He said it was because of internal political dynamics or political dynamics in South Africa that required close attention. And at the time, it seemed to me that maybe the DA was about to leave the coalition. They didn't in the end, of course. And I did wonder if maybe the trip to Spain would suddenly be back on, and obviously it wasn't. But certainly I thought that was a very interesting moment. There'll be lots of different ways to look at that. I've been thinking a bit about working ages, and Standard Bank said on Friday they were moving their retirement age from top executives from 58 to 63. This basically means that the people who are currently running the show, Sim Chabalala, will be able to stay on a little longer. Do you have an age in your head of when you would like to stop working? Is it something you can say at the moment? I mean, I kind of want to keep working for a long time, especially if I can keep doing this. Maybe I won't be able to. But I wonder if you have an age at which you would like to stop working. Is that something you've ever thought of? When would you like to stop working? There's another question, though, which is that if you're working in a company, say it's a difficult, intense company, let's use the Eskom CEO job as a good example. I've always thought that is one of the toughest jobs. How old is too old to run that? Do you think 65, 70, 60? I mean, at what stage should you no longer be CEO of Standard Bank just because of your age? There's some people who've been CEOs on big JSE-listed companies for a very long time. But do you have a particular age in your brain? I'd like to hear it, please. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the arrests today of the MK MPs Brian Molefe and Siyabonga Gama and Anoj Singh, all implicated in wrongdoing relating to the locomotive tender when they were at Transnet. Findings were made against them by the Zondo Commission. That led for calls for action to be taken against them. Also, of course, Molefe and Singh were very involved at Eskom. Dr Iraj Abedian is the CEO at Pan-African Investments and Research Services, has played his own role in unveiling what was happening at Eskom and Transnet, and was at one point on the Transnet board. Iraj, good evening. I really appreciate the time. There were so many issues that arise from what these three are accused of doing at Transnet. Molefe was going to Saxonwold, it seemed, every second day. He seemed to be at the beck and the call of the Guptas. What was really going on at Transnet at the time?
Good evening, Stephen, to you. I'm speaking with you. Thank you for inviting. I think it's quite critical, and in fact, from a fight against corruption, unfortunately, these three individuals have become the symbol of enabling corruption and malfeasance in the state-owned enterprises. I'm absolutely sure that they are not the only ones, but they were the most high-profile in enabling the plundering of not just money out of the country, but destroying the very important network industries or state-owned enterprises that Transnet is, as well as Eskom. And I remember both Anoj, when he was the internal auditor at that time, and Mr. Gama, who was the CEO of rail operations of Transnet. At that time, Stephen, Transnet was making 12 billion rand of profit for the government, for the national treasury, for the country, but importantly, was on the verge of upgrading its operations to minimize the use of roads because they are so damaging, because they're environmentally wrong, economically, from a cost of transportation, not the best way for global competitiveness, and a whole host of others. The way and Transnet spent quite a bit of money, and I was still there on the board and investment committee and so on. We spent a long time to devise a globalization of Transnet modernization. And that study is still somewhere in that office, unfortunately. But these guys just literally, like a wrecking ball, destroyed the institutions, the massive underpinning of this economy, that the economy is suffering from it as we speak. So I just hope that NPA has done its job, that it's not going to be another botched or somehow legally compromised process, because it's so important for our young and for our nation to see that even if it takes 12 years, 13 years, 14 years, at least this kind of undermining of national interest is brought to justice. I cannot express my anger and disappointment at it, despite the fact that I worked with these guys for a while, for 5-6 years.
It must have been quite strange to sort of watch it all happen. You mentioned getting money out of the country. Was that crucial in some way? And sometimes getting money out of the country is a crucial factor in corruption, because once it's out of the country, maybe ours, maybe somewhere else, you then can keep it. No one can ever get it back. And whoever plays that role really is helping money being stolen.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact is that the Guptas were not just a channel, they were a river of taking billions upon billions. The late Pravin Gordhan, Minister of Enterprises, Public Enterprises, was talking about trillions. And even if they didn't steal trillions, and they definitely did hundreds of billions of rand, but they did cause many trillions of damage over the past 10 years and for the next 10 years to come, because the government is now so literally out of resources, financially speaking, that to revive Transnet, to put it where back in 2009, where I left, to reconstruct that strength, which wasn't good enough for this economy, and reconstruct Eskom to where it was in 2009, 2008, the government hasn't got the resources. It's as simple as that, which means we are now literally kept hostage to this plunder that took place at the industrial stage. Even Hollywood couldn't have constructed a script like that, but it happened in the daylight.
Well, I was going to come to that. I mean, I remember when Siyabonga Gama was, suddenly going to be, he was suspended at one point. There was a disciplinary inquiry into his role at Transnet Freight Rail. He had signed a contract with someone he should never have signed a contract with. It was above his authority. And yet I was at a press conference when a journalist, she's passed now, but she said to Gwede Mantashe, I mean, this was Karima Brown, and she said, I know that the ANC's deployment committee wants him as CEO at Transnet. I mean, it was an astonishing thing to say. And yet, as we know, all of that was true. This was enabled by politics.
Absolutely. There is no question that as much as these guys have been caught by the justice system because of the evidence, their signature is there and so on, but behind them is a whole string of political players, not just one or two, who enabled that, who planted these individuals, gave them support. And if I may just go one step further, and I'm specifically referring to a person that I had a lot of respect for, Brian Molefe, when he was at National Treasury once upon a time, one of the really best performing, and subsequently at the PIC, where I had the privilege of working with the PIC, and he was the CEO at that time. We did a lot of constructive stuff together, and I must also add that a lot of it I did as pro bono because I felt that was such a good thing to do. But be as it may, for me it's so heartbreaking to see Brian being at the center of this incredible undermining of national interest, for which he himself worked for at least 10 years. To build the national treasury, to create resources and credibility and national sovereign rating. And he and I and many others did a lot of roadshows globally to put the South African sort of emerging economy and emerging out of apartheid on the global capital markets. And then find him a few years later at the center of this corruption is heartbreaking for me. And I'm sorry. It pains me to have to talk like this, but it's unfortunate. It has happened.
Dr Iraj Abedian, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. CEO at Pan-African Investments and Research Services, shows you the sort of personal cost in a way. And I mean, the Brian Molefe story is one of the kind of almost inexplicable stories of that period. Just to say, of course, that Molefe and Gama, both of whom are MPs from Kontowesizwe, do have support. MK putting out a statement just a few moments ago. I'll read that part of it to you. They say, we reject the notion that these arrests are rooted in a genuine pursuit of justice. Instead, they are part of a broader, deeply troubling campaign that seeks to intimidate and criminalize black professionals, intellectuals and revolutionaries, particularly those associated with the MK party. Well, there are different views, and as I understand it, Gama, Molefe and Singh have all said they're not guilty of any wrongdoing.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the National Coalition still holding for the moment after the DA said over the weekend it would not withdraw, despite its anger at President Cyril Ramaphosa's decision to fire their Deputy DTIC Minister Andrew Whitfield. The Democratic Alliance did say it will not take part in the national dialogue. It will vote against the budgets of ANC ministers that are implicated in wrongdoing. President Cyril Ramaphosa, though, did cancel his trip to Spain on Saturday afternoon, and in the government statement cited political developments in the country that he needed to focus on. Sam Mkukeli is a journalist and commentator. Sam, good evening. There are many things to look at here, but it seemed to me that maybe, just for a moment, Ramaphosa might have blinked on Saturday.
Stephen, hi. Yeah, it does look like he did a blink for a moment. After he held quite a strong line and he dismissed the deputy minister, and then he explained quite strongly the following day the reasons behind it. And then the DA had given him 48 hours to withdraw, and then it thought that he would held a strong line, and the failure to travel really shows that he blinked a little bit. But at the same time, I still think he earns a lot of credit for the way he handled things and how he stuck by his decision. He tends to worry about these things. And I remember I traveled with him. He cancelled a trip or he came back from a trip in London a couple of years back because there were fireworks and in politics of the Northwest around close to the border with Botswana. And simple little things tend to bother him. But this time around, he had showed a lot of strength in his decision. Quite frankly, it's unusual, uncharacteristic of a Ramaphosa to take a decision on anything, and now he's taking quite a bold one on his partners in the coalition.
There's so much. I mean, if he takes quite a bold one, was it because he was forced into it by the ANC? I still don't understand the timing here. Several months after Whitfield's trip.
I don't know if it's forced by the ANC, but you remember the president was in the Oval Office and he leads the conversations with the US on trade relations and AGOA negotiations. So this is a sensitive topic, when a deputy minister is said to have gone abroad on an unofficial trip without being sanctioned that properly. So he would take something of that nature personally, and I think he's quite incensed about it. And so he would take a decision of that nature in that case.
The DA's response to all of this, so maybe they made the president blink, but now they say they're staying in the government, they're against the national dialogue. I mean, doesn't it look a little weak?
Yeah, it's the most non-decision that's ever been taken in politics. And you're walking away from something that doesn't even exist, and when you've actually threatened that you could walk away from the government of national unity, it does make them look weak and silly to an extent. But you understand the frustrations they had. They thought they could get the ANC maybe to sit around round table or Ramaphosa, and then they discussing. I think they overplayed their card there with the threat, but it's not the first time they're doing something of this nature. The GNU is unstable. I see it as a pay-as-you government. It's going to be unstable for the next 2 years. And we'll never know if it's on or it's off. We'll always have these problems that need to be resolved every single month. And if the DA keeps threatening that it's going to walk away, then it really loses, the threat loses its currency. They're going to have a problem next month. They will have problems a bit later on and about discussions about cabinet politics and basic management of the coalition.
So there's so many different things going on here. I mean, people are suggesting that maybe it's the sort of rise of the Mashatile faction, maybe it's the lottery. For you, Ramaphosa took a principled decision about travel and defiance.
Look, that's what he said, but at the same time, we can't ignore the smoke around the lottery contract and the exposés in the media around people close to Deputy Minister or Deputy President Paul Mashatile. But at the same time, you have to consider when Mr. Ramaphosa cancelled the trip, Paul Mashatile would have been the acting president. Ramaphosa is traveling 8-hour trip, and the DA is walking away, and the Powell has got all his power, and there's the EFF waiting in the wings, and the coup could easily have been achieved in a short space of time. So you understand the dynamics there. And so whilst Mr. Ramaphosa says this is his decision, we can't totally ignore the politics around what's happening with the Department of Trade and Industry.
Simon Kwekeli, thanks so much. Journalist and commentator. Very interesting views on all of that. Your views on that as well tonight. 011 883 0702 and 0214460567.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Tana Mongwe is Portfolio Manager at Macro Solutions at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Tana, good evening. Extraordinary day for Reinet. Suddenly there seems to be an offer on the table for one of their assets, or their biggest asset really, and their share price shoots up.
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners. Yes, I think since last week there's been speculation of a deal, and then Reinet kind of just said, yeah, we've received... we're in conversations with Athora, and the share price kicked up. And I think it is investors in the market looking or finally seeing that value catalyst to crystallize the value within Reinet, as the company has been trading at a discount to its NAV for a while.
Exxaro, they had a pre-close statement today, gave us some insights into Transnet as well.
Yeah, I mean, what is positive is that it seems that for the coal line at least, rail performance is improving. But I think it also just shows that we still have a long way to go. Listening to your conversations earlier around Transnet, around Eskom and the state capture, And that's just the complete destruction that has happened across the SOEs. Transnet kind of now is just like picking itself up and trying to improve when and where they can. But it's incremental, but it is positive to see small improvements year on year.
It was interesting that Exxaro is worried about a lack of demand from Eskom. Their sales to Eskom will be down, I think, 15%, if I read that correctly. At the same time, there's quite low prices. There's a bit of an oversupply for thermal coal on international markets, leading to an oversupply here. Like so many other companies in this space, they really are hostage to the coal price.
Absolutely. China, India, everyone is sitting with excess stocks. Coal price year to date has been very, very low, sitting at the cost curve. It's been difficult to, you've got Transnet improving, but it's actually been difficult to export some of these, some of the bulk commodities because of the seaborne prices. And then you've got the biggest customer in Eskom, and the offtake is lower. And we've been looking at, we've been looking for Medupi Unit 4 to come online since March this year, but it's looking more of like a H2 type story. And Exxaro is quite confident that should improve volumes going forward.
And then the US markets at the moment, it's record highs for the S&P and for the NASDAQ, despite what I think looks to many people like quite a lot of volatility and geopolitical volatility. We know that markets are not necessarily linked to economies, but is this just about the sort of relentless march of capitalism in the US? Is that why they're so high?
Yeah, the US has been very interesting. We've seen this V-shaped recovery over the past few months, where we got into the year with Doge, with tariffs, with anti-immigration, and you sort of saw the weakness through the equity markets. And I think the equity markets are sort of looking through that now and are saying, actually, perhaps things are not as bad as we potentially expected. We're seeing positive earnings revisions. It looks like the market is sort of seeing through the noise around geopolitics. And they're saying we could potentially get a 1% Fed rate cut by the end of the year. And this is up from 50 basis points. So the optimism around earnings expectations for companies, specifically the large quality or the Magnificent Seven companies, is actually more positive, more so than the rest of the economy in terms of real GDP growth. And yeah, the market is pricing that in.
Tana Mongwe, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio Manager at Macro Solutions at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Bringing the time to 6:30.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, it's been interesting to look at the different impacts that different tariffs are having in different places, sometimes even when they haven't really come in yet. So there was confirmation today, for example, that Mercedes-Benz is suspending production at its East London plant. It's a big employer in that area. You can imagine the concern. Now, Mercedes-Benz are not saying this as I understand it, but it seems fairly likely that the main reason is that the US tariffs of 25% on all cars entering American markets would be having a big impact on Mercedes-Benz. And as a result, they've had to take the decision to stop production for a while. It's really, I think, the volatility and the uncertainty. And we'll talk a little bit more about uncertainty in a couple of moments. And we'll just talk about the impact that has on policy. And of course, with our national coalition being in the shape that it's in, this is kind of what it's going to be like for a while. But while we've got tariffs having that impact on Mercedes-Benz and presumably then on their production plant in East London, Santam Broker Solutions, putting out a report suggesting that insurers of some cars in South Africa are writing them off when they've been damaged in an accident, not because they're damaged beyond repair, but because it's simply impossible to get parts for them. And that getting car parts has been affected by all of this. Warren Tucker is a vehicle reviewer, someone who knows a thing or two about cars. Warren, good evening. It's one of those kind of strange things where a headline from the Trump administration may actually be having an impact on getting car parts. Is this proving to be quite a big problem?
Yes, good evening, Stephen. You see, it's kind of like one of these stories where you say the chickens are coming home to roost. Okay, so if we look at South Africa in the 90s, we produced most of the vehicles for export purposes. South Africa is a special country. We had special models. You only found them here. Manufacturers looked at our market and they built vehicles for us because we had such a large, buoyant car market. We've got a car-loving public. fast forward a couple of years, we've got load shedding. That impacted a whole lot of the manufacturing sector. I mean, if you look at Utenake, you've got the likes of Goodyear, Bridgestone, Continental, all the big tire manufacturers started shutting down plants, and that has a knock-on effect down the line. Now, previously, we would rely on local manufacture of parts, okay? And vehicles were assembled locally. Therefore, the parts manufacturers were local as well, okay? And fast forward to where we are now, that's not really the case anymore. We are importing more than what we are producing, and that puts us open to the trade winds of the world, the tariff increases, the Donald Trumps of the world that will decide that X, Y, and Z must change. So it impacts us.
I suppose it's difficult to know how many cars are being written off because you couldn't get this part or another part, and every sort of person will have a different story. But it seems to me pretty obvious no one wants to write off a car when it can be fixed. I mean, I realize it'll go to other places, but the amount of value that must be lost is huge.
Well, yes and no. So there's also another part of this that you must look at is, so when the vehicle's written off, in other countries the vehicle is coded. So what that means is the vehicle would be loaded onto a system as a write-off, and therefore that vehicle would not attract bank finance, and the vehicle could be purchased and repaired, but it is not worth what it was worth originally. In South Africa, the insurers have found out that, hang on, if we don't code these vehicles and we sell them just as a used vehicle, okay, then people are buying these vehicles and they're paying a lot of money for these vehicles at salvage auctions, at salvage depots, and then repairing the vehicles. And these vehicles are finding their way back onto used car dealer floors. So you could be buying a vehicle that was previously written off and repaired. Now, there are systems that have been put in place where people can check, but this has gone on for a hell of a long time where these accident vehicles are finding their way back into the used car sector. And because of that, they are fetching top dollar at insurance salvage auctions.
Presumably, they're not as safe. They're not as safe as they should be, and that must be an issue.
That is an issue. A lot of vehicles that are structurally written off are being repaired badly, and they, as I say, they do find their way onto the floor and are sold to by unscrupulous dealers to the general public, and they find out later that there's a problem once it's too late.
Is there another issue? So we've got newer brands coming into South Africa, and I'm talking specifically about the Chinese brands. Now, they're not made here. They're not, as far as I know, assembled here. I know there are talks to assemble some of them here, but not at the moment. So I presume then that the parts networks that you might have for, say, Volkswagen or Ford or Toyota or whatever that's been here for a very long time, you don't have those parts networks here, in the same way that you would for other brands, and that must be a problem.
That is a big problem, and you can actually see that with a lot of the vehicles. So with the Chinese vehicles being imported, what we see is you've got the importer, the franchise importer that imports the vehicles, and there's a separate company that imports the parts. And what tends to happen is the person importing the parts is waiting to fill a container first before they bring the container into the country. So they're waiting to fill that container, and then there's a lag in time in terms of parts getting to the borders of South Africa. Now, what's happened is that they have gotten better. They are keeping a lot of the service parts and your day-to-day consumables. But let's say a vehicle gets into an accident and you need headlights, front bumper, radiator, bonnets. There's shortages of that, and you tend to wait for those parts to be brought in. Whereas your established brands, your Volkswagens, your Audis, your Toyotas, Hyundais, Kias, they have established parts depots here where the manufacturer is represented in South Africa. They have established parts depots. So parts, if anything, the longest time you'll wait for a part is 21 days. But they will get the part to you. And that we've seen a lot of issues coming through from the Chinese vehicles with regards to that.
How long will it take, do you think, before, I presume at some point that someone will be stocking all of the Chinese parts? It would make economic sense for them to do it, especially if they can have a stockpile and sell them to you so you don't have to have the wait. You'll pay anything to get your car back.
100%. So you will see, look, there are new entrants into the market. It's all about them setting up themselves in the country. It's easy to sell the vehicle, but it's the after-sale service, and that's one thing that you must look at when purchasing a vehicle. Those people with long memories will remember that once upon a time, Hyundai came into South Africa with a bang, and then went belly up, and lots of people were stuck with vehicles that they couldn't get parts for. Then Imperial brought them back into South Africa, but brought them in such a way that they set up everything from start to finish. And that is going to be the case with the Chinese vehicles, where at some point they need to be established. There need to be more stringent laws put in place so that manufacturers, when they do come in, there are requirements for them to establish certain market offerings. For example, the German vehicles have to keep parts for at least 10 years after the last series of that specific vehicle came out. So the 3 Series, the E90, they need to keep parts for at least 10 years after that at their dealers. So those are laws that need to be put in place for everybody so that the playing field is level.
I suppose in a way with cars and parts, you get what you pay for, right? If you are buying a cheaper car, you're probably going to battle for parts.
Definitely. Look, if you look at the market at the moment, the new car sales have picked up, and that's mainly driven by the Chinese imports. Because what people are saying is that I can buy a brand new Chinese car for the same price as buying a second-hand equivalent German car. And with this vehicle, I'm getting all these bells and whistles, and they look smart. And that's the thing that's been sellable at the moment. But what's the after-sale service like? What's that car going to be worth in 2 or 3 years' time? What is the dealership or the dealer network? What does that look like? And
travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
A lot of the time, consumers are just interested in getting into a new car. The other things come afterwards. They think about that later.
Warren Tucker, really appreciate the time and the thoughts. Thank you. As you can hear, expert on the car industry and vehicle reviewer.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Good to hear from you this evening on The Money Show. Well, Business Live reporting today that Starlink has promised to spend around 2 billion rand in South Africa if they get a license to operate here. That money would be spent on developing a network of earth stations and data centers that would also ensure that around 5,000 police stations are connected to the internet. Jan Vermeulen's the editor at mybroadband.co.za. Jan, good evening. It's so interesting to watch this play out. If Starlink has made this promise, then clearly they're prepared to invest here. They're prepared to give up something for it so long as it's not 30% of their equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's pretty standard across the IT industry, actually. It's just telecommunications that has this obstacle in the way of licensing. But, Google and Microsoft have also pledged billions of rands of investment in South Africa as part of their obligations in the country. And, with promises of everything from free training to helping small businesses. So, yes, it appears that they're quite willing to invest and to meet their obligations as long as it's, as you say, not giving away equity in the business.
Certainly I see Starlink as a network of satellites that exist far above us and don't really need anything on the ground in South Africa. But clearly, if they're going to spend that amount of money here, they clearly do need some infrastructure on the ground.
Yeah. And so this is now, this seems to be, in addition to, or at least a supplement to the 500 million investment that they've already pledged specifically for equity equivalent investment type stuff. The article here talks about investing in earth stations. So the thing about the internet is that it's on the ground. And so all the stuff that you want to access, whether it's Netflix or whether it's news websites or whatever the case might be, you need to get to a data center which is on the ground. And so while the satellites can relay your request to a concentration point somewhere on the Earth, it does need to get back to an Earth gateway. And the closer those are to you, the faster your connection will feel. And so right now, South Africa does not have a Starlink Earth gateway. And that comes with all kinds of other things that need to be rolled out. Fiber needs to be deployed to that Earth station. That requires then all the civils to go with it. And the capacity, because it doesn't help that you've got a fiber that's not been lit up. So that means you need to buy capacity, you need to peer with other networks and so on. So yeah, there's a huge amount of investment that happens for an internet provider to actually launch.
Does that mean then that if we get these upload stations in South Africa, that would probably speed up Starlink's service, say, in Namibia?
Yeah, and all our neighbouring countries that have launched around us as well, where there's no Earth station available. So Lesotho, Eswatini, same thing. If they can land at an Earth station, even better if the Earth station is very close to an internet exchange point like NAP Africa or INXZA. So yeah, if it's right there, then getting the content from where it's stored to where the user is trying to use it somewhere in rural South Africa will be much faster than it is right now, which is landing at an Earth station somewhere north of us, and then having to make its way all the way back via either an undersea cable or a long terrestrial line.
There was a really interesting piece by Carol Payton in News 24 today suggesting that Starlink had actually played a pretty bad game in South Africa, that maybe Elon Musk had been too politically aggressive. There would have been other ways to manage all of this. What do you think of that? I mean, in a way, and I mean, for various political reasons of his own, involved, with Trump, obviously, that maybe perhaps he could have, if you just wanted Starlink in South Africa, it might have been up and running by now. There would have been other ways around it. But in fact, maybe he's just taken the wrong approach. I'm out of my depth there in terms of political commentary, but it certainly from where I'm sitting, what I can tell you is there were many other ways for Starlink to have launched in South Africa, which would have included partnering with local entities that already have the necessary licenses. And so giving away equity is not the only way, or not giving away. We always say give away, but what we mean is selling at a tremendous discount. And so selling 30% equity in your local entity is not the only way to do it. Other satellite providers have for years worked through middlemen in South Africa, and I've spoken to folks in the industry who have let me know that there were various options in front of Starlink, but they really, really do not like the idea of going through middlemen. There might be other factors involved. There's a lot of speculation that I don't want to repeat because it's just speculation. And so they've chosen this way, where they want to launch directly in the country. They want their own license. And that means that they need to wait for the necessary stuff to play out. Now, what I could say is if it wasn't for the political storm in a teacup around this, it would have probably gone faster. But because it's Elon Musk and he's linked to SpaceX, there's probably going to be a legal challenge, and that's going to drag everything out by a year or two or maybe more. Well, my sense is also that there's going to be a legal challenge. The competition, I mean, Caper, the sort of European one, or the Amazon one, I should say. China has one as well, I understand. I mean, by the time Starlink gets here, they might not have the playing field all to themselves anymore.
Yeah, definitely. The longer they wait. Look, no doubt that they're the dominant player everywhere else. Their early mover advantage is substantial, plus they control the very launch system that delivers these satellites into space affordably, right? So they do have a tremendous advantage in the whole field there. But yes, it could be that South Africa ends up, instead of being Starlink country, it ends up being Kuiper country, or we end up using one of the other low Earth orbit satellite providers that are coming online. But no one has the scale that Starlink has at the moment. They've got a lot of catching up to do.
Jan Vermeulen, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time. Editor at mybroadband.co.za. In a moment, uncertainty and an index. First, though, it's just gone 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
Good evening. Well, plenty to come over the next little while. We'll be talking about the Policy Uncertainty Index. Well, the Policy Certainty Index, always get that slightly muddled up. But the question, of course, is, are we going to really expect any certainty now? It seems to me that we're going to have this coalition kind of turmoil for the next couple of years. This is how it's going to be. Will they pull out? Will they won't? Will they kick them out? Or will they won't? Looking forward to our book review this evening. In fact, we're speaking to the authors, Professor David Kinley. He's an expert in human rights law. It's called In a Rain of Dust, Death, Deceit, and the Lawyer Who Busted Big Asbestos. Really interesting. It's actually all about something that happened in South Africa nearly 90 years ago, a very long time ago. And then Zelda Lagrange, the former private sector to Nelson Mandela. She's an author now. She looks at trying to reduce polarization in society. So quite a lot to look forward to from that conversation, I think.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, I think the arrests today of Brian Molefe, Siyabonga, Gama, Anoj Singh and others is going to lead to a lot more kind of calls for orange overalls. And let me tell you what I want to see, and you can tell me if it matters or not. Maybe it doesn't. But when people call for orange overalls, and I completely and utterly understand, it's a legitimate thing to say. You're basically saying people must be found guilty. And based on the Zondo Commission evidence that we've seen, I find it very difficult to say that they're not guilty. But let me just say this. I think what might make us all feel a bit better is not so much the outcome of a court case, although those are going to be vitally important one way or another. It's to see the person who is accused of wrongdoing on the stand under oath answering questions about it. First, from their own lawyer, so Brian Molefe, for example, giving his story. And secondly, from the prosecution, putting the facts to them. I've been lucky enough to watch a couple of cases where you can see that. And you know quite quickly, actually, in cross-examination, whether someone is guilty or not. Because cross-examination is such a powerful tool. It's what is really the making of talk radio, actually, is cross-examination. That's kind of the point of it. It's why, and let me give you a good example of when something doesn't work. So yesterday, Caesar Kaya Holdings, the consortium that has put together the winning lottery bid, their chair, Moses Temba, put out a video and essentially hoping that people will see it, maybe TV stations will play it, you'll hear the sound of it, etc. But that doesn't carry any weight because you're not answering questions. You can't just go and say, the sky is blue. That's not the story. The story is, why is it blue? We need to ask questions. So I would say, I'm not, I haven't been asked to give any advice to Caesar Kaya, and I can't imagine that I would if I were. Maybe, you never know. But I would just say, so let me give the advice publicly so you know what's being said, is I would say, if you really want to change a narrative around a story, you actually have to answer questions. Answering questions works. I've seen it happen many times. I've seen it happen in court, and I've seen it happen in the court of public opinion. So if you have a view, if you're feeling that you're hard done by, come and answer the questions. That's when people will know and when people will change their minds. It's not enough just to say, I'm not guilty or XYZ or unfairly targeted or whatever. You have to actually answer the questions.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Well, let's talk uncertainty now. The Northwest University Business School's Policy Uncertainty Index moderating a little in the second quarter from the record high in the first quarter. Mainly, I suppose, because the first quarter was dominated by Trump and tariffs. And you remember how scary all of that time was. Professor Raymond Parsons is the person who helps to put the index together, an economist at Northwest University's Business School. Raymond, good evening. I mean, so much has happened over the last few months. I suppose it's easy to forget just how unsettled, how uncertain the first quarter of the year was. But what changed from the first quarter to the second quarter?
Well, good evening, Stephen. And as you rightly say, the first quarter is the benchmark because that was the record high for our policy uncertainty index over the 9 years that we have been, in fact, trying to see what the level of uncertainty has been in our economy. So the two major factors, firstly external, as you rightly say, was the shock, the first round of shocks of the tariff which were announced by the White House. But internally, remember, also in that quarter, the first quarter, we had the uncertainty around the first time that a South African budget was not introduced on the day in which it was scheduled and would be postponed. And as we know, what happened over the second and the third rounds of that budget. So that explained the high record level of the PUI in the first quarter. But in the second quarter, there's been obviously some easing, some changes in the tariff approach. We are looking now to the 9th of July for the next deadline. So several of those tariffs have been suspended until now, not all of them. So there's still a big cloud of uncertainty. And secondly, of course, internally, there have been both positive and negative factors. But on balance, the total impact has been to say, yes, there's been an easing from the record level, but the level of policy uncertainty is still well in negative territory and is an issue that we need to address. And I say that with this caveat. The external factors, there's not much that a small open economy can do about them. It has to respond to them. And it responds partly by addressing the factors over which it has control, namely internally, and in that process also build some resilience in order to deal with any external shocks. So that's where we are now with the level of our policy uncertainty index.
The sort of what happened towards the end of last week and over the weekend, the sort of moment where it looked like maybe the DA would pull out of the coalition government over the firing of Andrew Whitfield. I mean, it's become a big story. I suspect it might rumble on for a while. But it seems to me that we can have quite a lot of uncertainty coming out of our politics still for quite a while, despite the fact everybody was so happy after the election. Well, the business community was.
Well, Stephen, I think a big picture is that if you're a business decision maker, you're probably saying to yourself, are we into a new normal of uncertainty or are we into a new abnormal of uncertainty? I don't think we quite know, given both the external and the internal factors. I would just make 2 points before I get onto your specific question, that what the data is telling us, the economic data, and this is reflected to some extent in the PUI, is that this economy is in incipient upturn, which is battling to try and maintain momentum. We are battling, and you can see that in the reduced forecasts of growth, which are now down to about 1% for this year. We know that's not good enough, and we know what we need to do in order to create a more favorable climate in order to engender the economic activity and the investment that we need. On the political side, it's clear that the markets and business want the GNU to succeed. They understand there will be hiccups, there will be tensions, and obviously it would be bad news for the economy if the GNU was in any way to collapse. But the important point now is that from a business point of view, which is not party political, they simply say, if you want us to invest, if you want growth more than 1%, you must offer us political stability and some degree of policy certainty that we in business who have to undertake big investments will know where we stand over the next few years in terms of the commitments we need to make. If we can give the decision makers on the investment side that sort of assurance, and we can build on what we are trying to do in terms of accelerating reforms, getting the infrastructure spending translated into tangible projects on the ground, then we can do better. But the big message of the PUI is we're not there, and this economy is at the moment struggling to gain momentum to even reach the 1% growth for this year.
The Trump factor. In some ways, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, attack how Trump always chickens out, that things are never as bad as they sound. Could he have lost a little bit of his bite in some ways? Because people kind of know now that he's not going to do what he says he's going to do. He's going to do something a little less than that.
Well, yeah, that's true. But it's combined with a very erratic approach. And this is the big problem that I think many decision makers and indeed the foreign policy experts have to grapple with. Yes, some cakes, the bark is worse than the bite. But embodied in that is a huge level of unpredictability. You simply don't know. Take the Canadians. They thought they were working out something in the last few days with the United States. Now, overnight, suddenly the White House has said, no, we are going to take a retaliatory action because of some action you take. So this whole uncertainty around the fact that the rules-based system has been abandoned, that it could easily generate into a beggar your neighbor policy. You simply don't know where you stand. So the important point from an external point of view is you will have to develop your internal policies to be able to cushion you against some of this uncertainty. But from the South African point of view, the important issue is there are factors under our control that can make a difference to our economic performance. And so those external issues over which we can exercise very little control, except to react or respond to them, we've got to say, what is the unfinished business of the GNU agenda that will give us the impetus, the acceleration, the push that we need to translate what we've said we're going to do into a much better economic performance, underpinned by the investor confidence that we need, and in that process reduce the policy uncertainty which has bedeviled so many of the investment plans that we've heard about in the past.
Professor Raymond Parsons, thank you very much indeed, from Northwest University's Business School.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, plenty to come in the next little while. We'll review the book In a Rain of Dust. It's about asbestos. Strangely, not that asbestos, if you know what I mean. I'm not talking about what happened in the Free State. I'm talking about what happened over a much longer arc of South African history. So we'll be talking about that in just the next little while. It's been astonishing and very interesting to me to watch some of these debates play out around working ages. And I asked earlier if you had a sort of age in your life at which you think you would like to stop working. I think there's quite a lot to think about, actually, when we get to that stage. I know some people want to keep working. They sort of live to work. They want to keep going. Some people do work to live. In other words, they don't really enjoy it, but they do it because they have to. I think it depends on what you're doing, what role you're performing. I've heard people talk about how angry they are, that they've been told that they basically have to stop working when they don't want to. I know some people who are incredibly productive despite being a little older than me or a lot older than me. And I know others who actually maybe really shouldn't be working at all and should actually be sort of, doing something else with their lives, maybe just resting, or recovering, I suppose you could say, from the world of work. It's a very interesting debate. I mean, some people are incredibly productive, and some of our politicians actually are certainly sort of way past what most corporates see as retirement age of 60 or 65. There was a time when quite a few companies seemed to reduce their retirement age from 65 to 60, which I never really understood. It seemed to me it was more about some other kind of strategy, getting newer people in to the building perhaps, or something like that. It did surprise me. but that seems to have stopped. So yes, difficult to sort of know, and I know that every single person will have their own view. So we'll, anyway, very interested to hear from you on that on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, time to look at your book review this week. It's In a Rain of Dust, Death, Deceit, and the Lawyer Who Busted Big Asbestos. We're lucky enough, in fact, to have the author on the line, Professor David Kindley, is an expert on global human rights law. He's been writing this book over quite some time. David, good day to you. I really do appreciate the time. Thanks so much for talking to us. It's a very important topic. It spans a very long time, 90 years. When did you first hear of this story?
Well, in fact, as an academic, I've been teaching the case that came out of this story for 25 years. It's a very important legal case for law students. So that's when I really heard of it first, whenever the case was being brought in the British courts in the mid-1990s.
You're going to have to explain to us the beginning of this. It involves a British company called, confusingly for us in South Africa, Cape, because Cape, of course, is, the name of some of our provinces. And people at that time think of the Cape as what is now the Western Cape around Cape Town. What was the company doing, and why was it so dangerous to its workers who, from what I can see, had no protection whatsoever?
Well, indeed. I mean, it was called Cape Asbestos because that is indeed where they were mining the asbestos, mostly in the Northern Cape around Prishka. And that's where the name came from. It's a British company, and that was crucial. A British company that was mining and milling asbestos, both in the Northern Cape and in Limpopo, as it is now. And they were exposing their workers both to blue and brown asbestos, which are the two most dangerous forms of asbestos on Earth. And what's more, the way in which they were mining and milling it was so careless, I think we can definitively say, that those people who lived in the communities around them were also suffering from the asbestos-related diseases. And this case was based largely on that fact. Those people who were environmentally exposed to asbestos dust had no compensation avenues whatsoever. And so the negligence claim that was brought against Cape, saying you knew about this, you didn't take enough care for your workers or for those people living in the community, that action was being brought in the British courts to sue a British company for what it had done in South Africa.
Was it obvious early on that these types of asbestos were dangerous? I mean, I realize that there was a time when asbestos like lead wasn't anything, not anymore, of course. When could the company have sort of stopped arguing that it didn't know asbestos was safe? Dangerous,
well,
I mean.
That's the $64 million question, Stephen, because that is the point at which you can then identify when they should have been acting in a responsible manner rather than a negligent manner. Really, the very first indications of this were in Britain in the 1920s, when people were seen to die, actually to suffocate from overexposure to asbestos. But in fact, globally, the real breakthrough moment came in the early 1960s when South African scientists were able to demonstrate an unequivocal link between blue asbestos, chrysidolite, which was mined in the Northern Cape, and mesothelioma and many other asbestos-related diseases. So in the 1960s, the early 1960s, that medical evidence was irrefutable. And one of the most extraordinary things about this case, really one of the most damning things about the case, is that the asbestos industry as a whole across the globe, but particularly in South Africa in the 1960s and 70s, took the view that it could hide, conceal, play deceitful games with the information that was being provided by the scientists because they were in a position that their commercial position in which they could do so, and most importantly, a political position in apartheid, where they were able to pull the levers of politics such that it benefited them rather than the people that were living around or mining or milling the asbestos.
Well, I was going to ask how big a factor apartheid and South Africa's racist policies at the time were in this. I mean, did anything like this happen with asbestos in other parts of the world?
Not to the extent that it did. Indeed, given that this is a British company, one of the interesting points that I draw out in the book and that the lawyer pushed in the case is that this British company knew that it had certain standards to meet in Britain, as was the case across the Western world, that it did not have to meet in South Africa. Not only did it not meet those lower standards in South Africa, it actually undermined them as well. So it was like a double whammy. So South Africa clearly was in the thrall. The government was in the thrall of big industries like asbestos, such that they could continue to have working conditions that simply were not tolerated in the home country of the company itself, which really is duplicitous and was the base grounds upon which Richard Mirren, the lawyer, was able to bring this case successfully in the House of Lords in the United Kingdom.
It was an incredible battle, and at some point, as I understand it, one or two dirty tricks and people dropping off dossiers and things like that.
That's right. Indeed. I mean, lawyers are lawyers. They really play to win. And yes, at one stage, a whistleblower dropped off an envelope into Richard Mirren's London law firm, which simply was addressed to the lawyer running the Cape case. And it was an expose of a media campaign to do dirty tricks on the Lead company and on Richard himself, saying they were ambulance chasers, saying, look, these people are using British legal aid money, taxpayers' money in Britain to push a case for black and coloured South Africans against a British company. Now, you can imagine how that would play to certain elements of the media in the United Kingdom. And that's exactly what they were trying to do, to build up pressure to say this company this law firm should not be running this case in Britain. It should be run in South Africa. The problem with running it in South Africa at that time in the 1990s was that there was no money for legal aid. The subsidiaries that had existed were no longer present in South Africa. So that would mean the 7,500 plaintiffs would get nothing. So the whole purpose of the argument pushing it in the United Kingdom was to say, here's where the parent company is, here's where legal aid is available, here's where we might get some compensation for these people who are dead and dying. And I should just add that out of the 7,500 across those 10 years that it took to push the litigation, nearly 800 died.
Sure. And I presume the communities there, I know Priska's seen as a relatively small town. There are other towns up there affected by asbestos mining. I mean, this is generational, isn't it, in some ways?
Most certainly, Stephen. I mean, one of the most extraordinary things about mesothelioma, which is the most virulent of all the asbestos-related diseases, it's a cancer, is that it has a latency period that many academics and medics now say reaches up to 50 years. So you could be exposed to just a short-term dust inhalation or ingestion of blue asbestos, and you may develop a mesothelioma, which will kill you in 50 years' time. Indeed, when I was in Prishka just 2 weeks ago with Richard, I was on a radio show there, and somebody called in to say that their father had worked as an accountant at Cape Industries for 3 weeks in Prishka. That's all. And 40 years later, he was diagnosed with mesothelioma and died. So that shows how vicious this can be. A short-term exposure can lead to your death 30 or 40 years later.
Sure. Astonishing. David, thank you very much indeed. It's an extraordinary book. Professor David Kinley is an expert on human rights law. The book is called In a Rain of Dust, Death, Deceit, and the Lawyer Who's Busted Big Asbestos. It's a fascinating account of a really important part of our history. Just after 7:30.
7:02.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Stephen is on X
at Stephen Grootes.
21 minutes to 8 the time. Well, one of the things about South Africa and talking about the lives of South Africans is that particularly, I think, maybe over the last 40 years or so, let me say the last 30 years or so, is that there are many, many people who have led lives that I think maybe they didn't expect to lead. They came from a particular community. They sort of thought, well, this is where I'll kind of stay. And in fact, something completely different happened. And I think one of those people might be Zelda Lagrange, most famously the former private secretary to our first democratically elected president, Nelson Mandela, working for him while he was in the presidency and then after as well. And she's agreed to speak to you tonight about her career. Now, of course, an international speaker and does many other things. Zelda, good evening, and thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us on The Money Show.
Thank you for having me, Stephen. Good evening to the listeners.
Have I described you accurately? Are you one of those, and there are quite a few South Africans, I think, now, who grew up in one community and found them living a life they never really expected to live?
Oh, completely. If I look at the 24-year-old that walks through the doors of the presidency, so naive, so unschooled, and quite frankly, very stupid. I couldn't imagine at that time that I would end up, going on a state visit with Madiba to places like Russia and China. Growing up so conservatively, so it's a completely different life than the one that I had planned.
Did you know when you walked in? So, if I remember correctly, you were working in government as in a sort of personal assistant role, admin role, and then were asked to come into this particular building. Did you know then what this was going to be?
No, not at all, Stephen. I applied for a job in Madiba's first presidency, in Jay Naidu's office. And as you'll remember, he was the minister without portfolio in President Mandela's cabinet. Now, before I used to work at a department called State Expenditure. Can you imagine? There was once a department called State Expenditure. And this job in the union buildings in Jay Naidu's office was advertised. And it was closer to my parents' home where I lived at the time. And also it was advertised that I could spend 6 months of the year in Cape Town when Parliament is in session. And that was very attractive to me.
So how did you end up then working for the president?
So on the day of the interview, fate and circumstance played its role. I was there for the interview for Jay Naidu's office, and then the door flung open and this very flamboyant black lady entered, Miriam Kladana, and she was the president's private secretary at the time, and she just announced that she needed an assistant, and after the conclusion of the interview, they told me who she was, and they asked whether I would be prepared to work for her. And quite frankly, I was just interested in the logistics of this job. Was I going to be closer to my parents' home, and whether I could do sessional duty? Because if to anyone growing up in the northern part of South Africa, you think if you can spend 6 months of the year in Cape Town, you've made it in life.
It's so interesting. So so you suddenly find yourself in this position. You're with the presidency. You're doing all sorts of things. It must have been, unbelievably exciting, and it was an unbelievably exciting time to be a South African involved in doing those things.
Absolutely, but also I felt like an imposter. Stephen, remember, those are the days when you couldn't Google anything. You couldn't Google what happened in South Africa and what the liberation was all about. So, very, very unsavvy for the position, not having, the skill or the knowledge. I had wonderful colleagues that worked with me, that helped me, through this transition period and just made me feel at home. So it was a very exciting time, of course, with all the things. We've just celebrated 30 years since that day on Ellis Park in the 1995 Rugby World Cup. So a lot of excitement happening, but at the same time also very overwhelming to me personally as a human being.
So you worked with Madiba after the presidency as well, and there were times, I think, it was probably, I'm sure, a little easier than being in the presidency. And yet there were times when he was called upon. There were times, I've read some of the accounts of, conversations he had with ANC NECs about HIV, for example. He was still very much involved in our politics. People still looked to him for guidance.
Yes, that's right. The pressure for me was more after his retirement. As you remember, when a president retires, you can choose one person from your public office to work with you in retirement. And our entire infrastructure really collapsed overnight. So we lost our protocol office, our media office, people who were concerned with logistics, advisors, and so on. So it was just Madiba and myself that started this post-presidential office, of course, with the help of Professor Jake Gerwel. But it was a very, very difficult time, that kind of stress and the pressure that you are under, because the world thinks now Nelson Mandela has got time for everyone and everything. So, it was really hard to try and manage that.
And also the launch of the Nelson Mandela Foundation and things like that, which, still play a moral role, had a bit of a difficult time recently, seems to be recovering from what I can see. That became very important to him and a big, big part of his life.
Yes, absolutely. Also, it housed or it homed the Schools and Clinics project. As you remember, Madiba would call business people, and there was a joke going around that if you get a call from Zelda asking or inviting you for breakfast with Nelson Mandela, it will turn out to be the most expensive breakfast of your life. He convinced big business to build schools and clinics in rural South Africa. So that was initially, it was the post-presidential office, but it also homed these projects, these ad hoc projects that Madiba started.
So I want to talk a little bit about you after all of that, because, and I remember so clearly when he passed on in 2013 and things would have changed and you would have changed too. You would have grown over the years. And you had to sort of make a life for yourself after that. And that must have been quite tough. You'd been working for one person and such a person for such a long time. I mean, you must have thought to yourself, I'm not sure what I'm going to do now. Or was there a more gradual process to it?
No, you're absolutely right, Stephen. Yes, it was quite an awakening. I'm very fortunate that 6 months after Madiba's passing, I published my book, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela. And I've been on the speaking circuit since 2010. So, that's the one tagged on the other, and the speaking career became my main focus. But you have to reinvent yourself all the time. You'll know as a public speaker as well, there's always a need for something new and a new angle and so on. So last year, November, I published my second book, What Nelson Mandela Taught Me, and hopefully making the lessons that I've learned from Madiba more relevant. So, I think it's going to be very difficult. I'm also at the age now where no one will employ me really. But you have to do, find things to do and find purpose in life. So I do so through a combination of my charitable work. I'm a trustee of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. I help with 67 blankets for Nelson Mandela Day where I can. I'm also a trustee of the AMICORP Foundation. So, all that adds up, and then you find that I find myself sometimes I'm busier than ever.
No, I know what you mean. It's feast and famine as well. You talk on your website about reducing polarization, and I'm sure your talks are around that. And I found that really interesting, considering where we are now, the Trump administration and all the rest. I mean, it seems to me the world is suddenly, call it, let's say, 2022 or so, growing more polarized than I ever thought it would be again.
Yes, it's a big focus of what I do at the moment, Stephen. I do feel, that what we can learn from Nelson Mandela is that he surrounded himself by divergent opinions all the time. Even people whom he not necessarily ideologically agreed with always. And, in this time where we live, we simply cannot shut each other down because we differ from one another. It's very important for me that that people are reminded what a good listener Nelson Mandela was. He listened to really understand even his opponents and his enemy really, understanding or listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And with social media and instant gratification, that almost becomes impossible today. So for me, there's so much more that we can still learn from Madiba's legacy in small lessons like this. And it helps sometimes just to be reminded of certain instances where he showed true leadership to help us cope with the world in which we live.
This is a terrible, terrible question. When you speak to people about reducing polarization, do you think people actually want to do that? it sometimes feels to me that actually there's a group of people now in very powerful positions who thrive on the polarization. They want to make it more and more polarized. They want to really turn us against each other.
No, absolutely. I agree with you, but there'll always be, in every society, there'll be opportunists like that. And we can listen to them, but it's, we also need to learn what to pay attention to and what not, and what do you allow yourself to be, or to influence you, so what really do I take from what a person says seriously? So, for me, there's so much going on social media all the time, and people, spreading fake news and so on. But I always try and think of, there's a human being behind that who's trying to achieve something, and I try to focus on the human being and not be swayed by the populist remarks that people make.
We're speaking to Zelda Lachranji this evening, the public speaker, and of course famous for her books and her work with Nelson Mandela.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Speaking to Zelda Lachranji this evening, someone, of course, famous for her work over the years with Nelson Mandela. Zelda, when you go and speak to different audiences about reducing polarization, about trying to bring people together, do you find audiences in some countries or some types of audiences are more receptive? I mean, I always think, and I mean, the research seems pretty obvious now, or pretty settled now, that a decision made by that diverse groups of people make better decisions than non-diverse groups of people. In your work, from what you see, do people sort of understand that? I mean, in a way, it's the kind of point of South Africa, I sometimes think.
Yes, I find it very interesting, Stephen, because it depends, the demographics of the group really that you speak to. I find, that there's, I recently, spoke to senior managers of pet stores in South Africa and got such a wonderful response. It's such a diverse group of people with such energy, not only for their company, but, really also for the work that they do and trying to change things in communities and so on. So it's really, age it plays a big role in the audience that I speak to. And then, as I say, the diversity of the group, the demographics of the group. But in general, people are quite, not, if you don't read social media, that's a different story. But in general, people are quite positive about the future of South Africa and quite open to listening, to someone speaking and trying to encourage them again to be hopeful.
I mean, I know sometimes that when you will be doing a speech or doing a presentation, someone will ask a question about present day politics, and you kind of know that's going to be the end of the constructive part of this conversation. Like, it can be very difficult to sort of move away from that. Do you find that a little bit, that people will then start to make points? And I understand why. I mean, it is what it is. They have a right to do it. But I sometimes think that some of the bigger, broader concepts get lost in kind of up to the minute-by-minute politics that we're involved in.
Yes, you have to remember as a speaker also that when people have an opportunity to ask a question, they also want to be heard, they want to make a statement. It's more about that than them asking the question. But what I do not tolerate, I'll give you an example. I was speaking to a very, very big international audience, also South Africans amongst them. And a gentleman got up and tried to tell me that South Africa is the laughing stock of the world and we've got the worst country in the world. And I actually, put my foot down because it was an international audience where I was speaking. And at the end, I got a standing ovation because, we also have to be, if everyone's reality is different in South Africa. Yes, there's a lot to complain about. But just, look at other countries throughout the world with the problems they face right now. And we have challenges as South Africans, but still the resilience of our people. We overcame apartheid. We ended apartheid. And when I say we, it's not as if I want to claim that I had anything to do with it, but I mean as South Africans, as a population, as a nation, we are still seen as a miracle nation from across the world. So, I find that people want to make statements, but if they want to, just complain and talk badly about South Africa, I try to point out the good and the hope. And, if we look at Nelson Mandela's life, spending 18 years in that small prison cell, and he remained hopeful every single day of that 27 years. And then I ask myself, who am I to give up hope now? So, I try and inspire people by reminding them what leadership we had in Nelson Mandela and the life lessons we can learn from him.
I suppose, there's so many different parts of this entire of this where you talk about the lessons that people can draw. And one of the ways that people used to change minds was to write a book about something. Books don't seem to sell. I mean, there are lots of them. There are plenty of people writing plenty of books and selling them in some cases. But I don't know if books change minds in the way that they used to. I want to hope that they do, but I don't know if they do.
I feel that personal contact is more powerful, Stephen. So it's one thing selling books, and I completely agree with you. We don't have a reading population, which is something we must change as South Africans. But people don't really read. If you did just, again, I'm sorry for all the references to social media, but if you make a long post on social media, you can see how people don't even read, just a few thousand characters. So never mind a book. And I feel that when you stand in front of people and you can connect and you can also share that solidarity of we have problems, we have pain in this country, but let's try and be part of the solution. I do feel that people connect better and they are eager to listen to stories and lessons and so on.
Are people still able to have their minds changed through that process? I mean, it seems to me that the moment that humans stop changing their minds, we're lost as humanity.
No, I don't think we ever stop changing. We stop changing the day we die. And, my aim is not to try and change people. My aim is to try and influence people by hopefully, just making them think differently about things and, or just assessing things from all angles like Nelson Mandela did, finding measure and finding balance and so on. So I don't think, people are close to changing. I mean, you'll always find in any community, you'll find radicals and people who are stubborn and people who will hold on to their old ways. But generally speaking, the people that I come across are quite eager to listen and to change their minds.
Zelda Lachranji, thanks very much indeed. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us tonight on The Money Show.